And we're good. Good morning. This is Steve Gladis, and we're starting this series called Steve Gladis Interviews With. And today's with is Angela Huebner, a good friend of mine who's a well-known psychotherapist in the area, family dynamics, a former colleague at Virginia Tech when I was at UVA, even though during football season we had to draw certain lines. Anyway, Angela, tell us a little bit about yourself, because I know people are very interested before we jump into the interview.
Yeah. So our relationship started when I was at Virginia Tech. You were at UVA. So I was a professor at Virginia Tech for about 17 years in the marriage and family therapy department, and taught all sorts of classes, did research on military families, taught students about family dynamics and what that looks like. And about 4 years ago, I left that to go into full-time private practice in Falls Church. And it's been a great transition. And so I'm able to pull all that stuff into full-time practice, which is lovely.
Talk a little bit about that military. I forgot about the military practice that you had.
Yeah, so back in 2004, my team had the first study in the country of the impact of deployment on adolescents. Because that was back, after 9/11, and when we really had that forward push, really looking at family dynamics and what happens to the people left behind and what influences adjustment from the young person's point of view. And not surprisingly, we found that the kids' adjustment very much depended on the at-home parents' adjustment, which then had implications for all sorts of connection in the community and connection with the away spouse. Even talking to the young people about what this level of connectivity meant when they were able to talk to a parent who was deployed in real time. And so a lot of their concerns that came out were really fascinating. And so we found ways to work with that culture to try to make it easier for them.
So that's interesting. We're sort of the opposite's happening now.
Yeah. Yep.
So talk about that. What are you seeing now? And when the opposite, when the parents are home who have been away, even if it's only away for 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day, what's that like?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I'm seeing in my practice is that these roles of worker, parent, spouse are really colliding because, like you said, there used to be a little more separation. And we need that. We need some ability to differentiate, right? To have my own self identity that's in these different areas. And now they're sort of pushed together. One of my favorite videos that I think probably everybody has seen is when they're trying to do the Zoom call and trying to be really professional, and the dog comes in and the baby walks in, and it's the worlds colliding, right? And we're used to sort of keeping those separate, and so all bets are off right now.
Sort of the George Costanza thing.
Yeah, exactly. The
worlds colliding.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's forcing all of us to think about all of this differently. How do I take space in close quarters? I mean, in Northern Virginia, most people are in close quarters, right? To have separate wings of the house isn't necessarily an option.
So as you're talking to employees right now, and I must add that you're not only a therapist and a very well-known one, but you're also an executive coach. And you and I have talked about especially family-owned businesses and how that family dynamic plays its way through. But I suspect that family dynamics play through in all organizations.
Absolutely.
What are you seeing when people are through your clients? Obviously, in the aggregate, you can't talk about individuals, but in the aggregate, what are they when they come to you? What are their fears or their hopes or their whatevers? What are you seeing?
The executives that I'm seeing are most at the top of the food chain, and their biggest concerns are about their teams, right? How am I going to talk to these people about furlough? How am I going to talk to these people about upping their game? And what we see is people tend to revert back to their sort of original stress physiology in times like this. And by that, I mean, we fall back into old patterns of what do we do under stress in times of uncertainty. And so I'm working with my executives to really say, how do you get centered and recognize what you've got control over? And then how do you provide that assurance to your team, right? In a time when things are uncertain. So helping people take that leadership role in my field, we talk about secure attachment, which simply means I know that somebody's got my back. I know that we're all in this together. I know that we've got a shared cause. And that's easy to see in families. It's also really relevant in the workplace, because that is our other family when you look at, how we spend our days. And so what I'm hearing is those executives that already had sort of that mentality set up, right? They had individual connections with people. People felt meaning from their work already. They felt like they mattered. Those teams, at least in the last month or so, are doing better, right? Because even though the outcome is uncertain, they feel like their contribution matters. And so I'm working with my executives to help them talk about, how do I see my people when they're working remotely? How do I value their contributions? How do I appreciate what they're doing? And even allowing them to see the totality of the worker, right? When the dog comes in, when the mailman comes, when the kids are crying, like not punishing people for that, but like being human and allowing for that. And that's a lot of what our conversations are focused on right now.
It's funny. Yesterday, I was listening to a video. Ruth Wegman was speaking on team coaching, and she's a very well-known researcher. And she was being interviewed. Her doorbell rang, and she said, "Shit!" And I thought, that's exactly what I'd say. And I have her sort of on this pedestal. She's a very brilliant woman, and hearing her say that made me think of her in a more human way. And like, God, that's exactly what I'd say.
Exactly. And that's the thing, right? We get to be human. And it's allowing, can we have that level of vulnerability, which is actually very courageous. And I know that gets, mixed bag. Another way to think about vulnerability is, am I available? Right? Am I available?
Oh, that's interesting.
To my teams, for them to see, I have no idea what we're going to do right now, but I know we're going to figure it out. Right? Because if I as the leader can assure you that I'm going to take the pay cut, which I think is amazing. Many people at that level are like, we'll take the hit to protect you. That engenders loyalty. That means I matter. I'm not just a cog in the wheel, right? So, and once I feel like that is the worker, then from a physiological standpoint, those stress areas of my brain, that survival physiology can calm down. And when that calms down, my centers of creativity and innovation and making new patterns happens. And I can be much more helpful to the corporation.
Talk about that toggle between when monkey brain kind of thing, and what happens when you're in that state of flight, and how do you get to a state of sort of more rational? Talk a little bit about that, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. So the neuroscience is very clear, and there's much more that's been coming out in the last decade or so. So we know a whole lot more than we used to. One of the things that's clear is when we're in that fight or flight place, and you can feel that, right? Because your heart rate will increase, you might flush a little bit, feel a little bit of heat, might be less focused. Our brain, prefrontal cortex goes offline because our body can't tell the difference between a physical threat and an emotional threat, right? And so right now we're in a lot of emotional threat. Most of us, I'm not saying this is across the world, of course, are safe. Like, we have enough food, we have shelter, we're in a relative area of safety. But when our brain goes off into the bad neighborhood of what's going to happen, I don't know, and we get lost in that bad neighborhood, we lose our ability to think rationally. So that's when the monkey brain takes over, and we find ourselves in the bad neighborhood of what if. And when we go there, fMRI studies show that our brain, literally, this part of our brain goes offline. The Wernicke's area of the brain, Broca's area of the brain, speaking, listening, narrow. And so we can't take in information, which is a problem, right? We kind of do this, and if we're in this kind of crouched, defensive survival mode, we can't grow. Those are mutually exclusive. And so it shuts down exactly in the time when we need people to be innovative, to think about how are we going to do business differently.
So talk about how do you get your patients or your clients to go from monkey brain to,
Yeah.
okay, it's going to be okay. You know,
Yeah.
we're going to have a rough time here. How do you
Hmm.
get them to, I call it the big switch. How do you get them to make that switch?
Yeah. It's a lot of paying attention on purpose. And so I know everybody has heard about mindfulness and meditation, but it's really brain training to get you to be able to notice what's happening physiologically and what your thoughts are in real time. And so I call it paying attention on purpose, like John Kabat-Zinn does. And
Yeah.
so I need to be able to notice when my heart is racing. I need to be able to notice when that thought of, oh my God, what are we going to do? You know,
Yeah.
or I can't figure it out. I need to notice when that's happening to me. And even just being able to notice it and name it brings me back into prefrontal cortex, right?
Talk
So
about that though. Talk about naming it, would you? Because a lot
yeah,
of people don't think if I name it, then it becomes a reality
that's
and it's
right.
worse. But I think it's different.
It's exactly the opposite. It's very
Yeah.
paradoxical. We have a culture that tends to push away thoughts and feelings that are distressing,
Yeah.
right? Or that make us uncomfortable, and that actually just makes them bigger. Right, we can get them
Huh.
away for a little while, but it's sort of like if you lock a raging 11-year-old, right, in his room, and
Right.
you slam the door shut and you say, okay, you're not coming out. He doesn't sit in there and play quietly. Like he
Yeah.
doesn't go, oh, okay, I guess I'm not needed, right? That's not how it works, right? Either breaks the door down or you go in there and everything is in shambles.
Yeah.
Um, when instead we turn toward the parts of us that are freaking out or the parts that we're uncomfortable with, we find out that they're actually trying to help us in some way. Because
Hmm.
every strategy, which includes thoughts, behaviors that we do, at
Mhm.
one point was helpful to us. Even if it didn't look helpful in the moment,
Mm.
those, like anxiety comes in, for example, to say,
Right.
pay attention, right? Our anxious parts are
Yeah.
trying to say, have you thought about this?
Mm.
And they can go too far, right? Then they're in the extreme. So when we're able to look at anxiety, for example, and say, okay, bring it. Tell me what you're anxious about, right? And
Uh-huh.
anxiety will say, bad neighborhood. What about this? What about this? What about this? When we name it, we have another part of our brain online at the same time.
Oh,
So
interesting.
then
So
we
what do
can,
you say to, so what would you say, and metaphorically what
yeah,
would you say to the 11-year-old?
yeah.
And then maybe tell me what you'd say to an employee who's starting to get really freaked out by all this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So to the 11-year-old, I say, I get you're scared. And if you think about it, if I'm operating from that 11-year-old survival strategy, which when I was 11 was the thing that saved me, right?
Mhm.
This
Yeah.
temper tantrum, this whatever I did helped me in some way.
Uh,
Uh, I have to remind that part that I'm not 11 anymore. And I've got this whole big toolkit to figure things out. And that if the 11-year-old, the anxious part will let me, functional adult, drive the bus, we're going to be okay. Right? I may
okay.
not know exactly what we're going to do, but I have a lot of confidence in my toolkit, which
Okay.
includes knowing how to do some research, knowing who else to connect to, knowing that I have the ability to figure it out, even if I don't have the answer in this moment. In other words, I'm telling the 11-year-old there's a grown-up in the house,
I got you.
right? Which is precisely what employees are looking for from
From,
their leaders, right? Can we have this stand-up call every day at 9? So I can say,
yeah.
here's the state of our business, right? How are you guys doing? Here's where we're at. Here's what I know. Here's what I don't know, right?
What would you, yeah, so just talk about a little
Mhm.
bit about how much communication should you do, more, less, the same amount of communication when people are under stress like this?
Well, so first, the grown up, there has to be a grown up in the house, right?
Right,
So
right, right.
so the leaders, the executives, need to get their internal house in order, is how I like to talk about it. So they need to be in a place, they have to trust that they are going to figure this out. They also have to trust that their team, hopefully, they've hired them because they've
Mhm.
got skills that I don't, right? So that
Mhm.
I'm trusting you to help us figure this out. It's not all
Yeah,
on me. It's that growth mindset, right?
yeah,
Are we a team in this together, and together we can figure it out? Or I'm supposed to have all the answers and, oh my God, I don't, right?
yeah,
Because if that's my stance, we're sunk,
yeah.
right? Because I can't sell that, because the people that are looking to me for leadership are going to feel that incongruence in the words that I'm saying and what they're picking up,
Uh,
and they're not going to feel safe. They're not going
so,
to feel
so
safe.
if you're, because some theories are, hey, over communicate during a time of stress so people can, but you're saying you better, if you're going to do that, you better have yourself together, because you could be over communicating stress, right? Or anxiety.
Exactly.
Infecting people and use
Exactly.
yeah. Oh, interesting. What
Right.
an interesting idea.
You've got to have that. What's the intention? What's my state when I'm communicating?
Yeah.
Because we feel it, even though we don't talk about that as a culture, our physiology is wired to pick that up,
Yeah.
right? Something just doesn't quite match. And we might not cognitively, consciously pick that up, but our body is. So all of a sudden my heart rate is up and I'm saying, this doesn't make sense. Oh, but he's telling me this, but it doesn't match. But he's telling me, right? And it doesn't work. And then I'm not calm.
Oh,
Right?
interesting.
Versus in the presence of a solid leader, you go, like you just go, shoulders drop, and everybody feels like we're in this together. We'll figure it out.
Wow, interesting stuff. Because you hear a lot about, over communicate during stress, but you're saying, yeah, not so much.
Intentional communication.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Don't not communicate, but be very intentional with what you're communicating. And have.
So how would you?
Yeah.
Oh, how would you get? So if you were coaching? I'm just looking at my notes here. If you were coaching a CEO or a unit leader, a team leader, how would you talk to them about getting ready for the meeting?
Well, I would first say, in service of getting your own house in order, what are you afraid of? Right? Tell me what your fears are. Tell me the gremlins that are in your closet. Tell me, you and I work with your anxiety to get that in a place so that you're leading, not the anxiety. But to pretend like you don't have it, that's not going to help us. You're just going to try to white knuckle it. And we can do that, right? And leaders do it all the time, but that's not a team that thrives under stress conditions. So that's where we would start.
I like that. So you mentioned gremlins, and I've read some of the work on gremlins and maybe talk to some of my clients about that. But talk about the gremlins a little bit, because as leaders prepare or come to us in coaching, a lot of times they have these gremlins. I'm not good enough, or it always ends badly for me, or I never this, or I always that. Talk about
that. We talk about those as like kind of core beliefs, the gremlins. I like that word. Yeah. Part of what I do with my therapy clients and especially with my executive coaches or my executive clients is helping them understand where that belief came from, right? Because too many models focus on, well, that's not true, that's not true, that's not true. And what I found is first we have to understand how at one point that belief served me. Because at one point it did. For example, the I'm not good enough, when you're young or at some point in your life, the I'm not good enough can motivate you to work harder. Right? So if I'm not good enough, then I'm going to develop a whole set of competencies. It's going to push me. Right? So sometimes the work is understanding where that negative belief started. How old were you when that first came to be? Like when you feel that belief, how old do you feel? I know it's a funny question, but do you go, oh, I'm 8,
10,
right? Yeah, I'm 10. And then when we understand that, we can have a whole lot more compassion for that part of us. And as soon as I have a compassionate connection to this part of me that believes I'm not good enough, or I don't know what I'm doing, now I can shift it, right? Because I'm in this open place toward it rather than this defensive away from it, right? We can't grow and shift at the same time. We can't grow and protect, at the same time.
At the same time.
So as soon as I understand and have some compassion for, of course, this is what I believed, and that belief made me work harder. It got me into this college. It got me into. Thank you for doing that. Okay, now I do know what I'm doing, right? And so I sort of update it from a brain perspective. We're opening that neural network and putting new data in it, and so then it goes back into subconscious with a new file. It's like we've
update, like a Word document or something.
Yeah, we've done it. Exactly. We've gone from Windows 1995 or 1975, right, to 2020, and it shifts it. So then a different thing is driving underneath. But too often we just try to outrun those. And that works for a while, but it's such an expense, an energetic expense to the rest of our system. It cuts us off from that creativity and innovation. It shuts it down.
So that's fascinating. I like that, updating the file and putting it back in. Let's just, I wanted to switch a little bit to, people are working from home now a lot.
Yeah.
And as you said, the dog's running through, the kids are doing all kinds of stuff. What are your thoughts about working from home? What kinds of things are working for people? You know, if you were to give people some advice or some thoughts, what might that be in terms of how do you get space from each other? How do you, what's healthy? I don't know.
Right. I think what's helping most people is keeping to some sort of a schedule, right? Allowing that it's going to be a different schedule than you had before, but let everybody know in the family, right? From this time to this time, I'm not to be disturbed because I'm in my meetings, right? And that will work, right? But being very clear of here's the expectation, right? Go ahead and take a shower, eat your breakfast, like do your normal routine, and then take some breaks. So that's the structured piece.
Yeah. So have a structure, and know everybody else's structure, and try to respect that.
Try to respect it as much as possible, and then have some humor about the whole thing, right? To be able to say, it didn't work, right? And we're still okay, right? The dog came in, and I was doing the CNN broadcast, and the baby came in. Okay, right? We get to be human, and we're all in this together.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what since you are a well-known and highly sought-after marriage therapist on the other side, and I would like to talk a little bit in a bit about coaching versus therapy. But before we do that, how do I keep, in the midst of all this, how do I keep up with my partner? What's good hygiene for my partner, or my wife, my husband, my whatever? What's some good hygiene there? I mean, I'm sure respecting boundaries and all that, but I just thought you'd have some really good insights in that.
I think what we're seeing now is everybody's patterns are coming to light, right? So you can hide when you're not in quarantine, but when you're stuck together, all of the little, oh man, you chew too loud, or like you keep
my wife. Really, I slurp too much when I eat. When I eat soup, I make too much of a sound. I drive my wife crazy. Yeah.
Right. So, and if you're not together all the time, you can sort of let that slide. But when you're together all the time, it gets so. One big tip for couples again is to keep a sense of humor about this. And recognize, this is where the commitment comes in, right? I also think it's really important for couples to figure out ways to have some distance. It might be we take walks separately sometimes and together. We figure out different routines. It's a good time to break out the deck of cards, right? To play some board games, to go back to kind of what got us together in the first place, when it was just us focused on each other and we didn't have all of these other commitments.
Yeah. So what happens on those days when you're just driving each other nuts? I mean, it happens all the time. And Don and I have been together for 40 plus years, but what happens on stage? You're just driving each other nuts. I'm telling her to redo the cabinets, and she's telling me to do something outside and get out of her hair. When you do see those signs of stress, what are just some quick things to do?
One is to say we're doing that thing, right? We're nitpicking each other. We're doing that thing. I would with my couples, we talk about when they get into their negative cycle of interaction, which could be exactly what you said. I start to get bossy, and then my partner starts to get defensive, and then I double down, right? And now we're in this negative
loop.
And so helping couples see what's my go-to thing when I'm stressed. Right. And so for me, it might be, okay, well, let's do this project. Let's get the house in order because that's something I have control over. For my partner, it might be, oh, let's just shut down. Let's just shut down and, watch TV and not have to worry about anything. So when we see our default patterns, when we can say we're in that cycle. And so I would couples to name it.
Same thing as before, right?
Exactly. Name the cycle. And so, couples have funny names for their cycles sometimes, and it's good because it kind of gets them out of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
One named it after hurricane, like what was the
Yeah.
hurricane in New York back in the
Yeah. I remember.
yeah, so they named it after the hurricane. And so when they would say that,
Yeah.
it sort of got funny. Another couple used Marco Polo because they had little kids. So when they were feeling like they were doing it, one would say Marco, and when the other one responded with Polo, it was okay, I got it. Like, yeah, we're doing that thing, and we both need to just take a breath. Take a breath, slow
kind of a
down.
safe word that allows you to recalibrate.
Yeah, and just to say, I remember I love my partner and we're doing that thing, and we just need to, again, bring it to conscious awareness, because we go right into these automatic processes, just like we do individually in stress. And the best way to do that is to cultivate this ability to notice, pay attention on purpose to what we're doing. And then we can shift it. It's our superpower, right? When we can focus our attention on what's happening, we can change it. We have choice.
So that's a kind of a John Kabat-Zinn thing. Pay attention on purpose in a particular way, right? I mean, that's what he calls meditation.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The difference. So talk about briefly about the difference between when you're a therapist and when you're a coach, because they're two different things, right?
Absolutely. Part of what I see is in the coaching role, people have tend to have more of a specific thing they're trying to accomplish. They have a more intentional goal. Like maybe it's to be able to communicate better with their team. Maybe it's to be able to finish this project. Like there tends to be more of a concrete outcome. In therapy, it tends to be more on the emotional side of things. Like I want to be less anxious. I want to be more assertive. There's a huge overlap.
Yeah.
But the techniques are a little bit different. So it's a really interesting blend for me, because I can use the powerful questions of coaching coupled with what I know about human development and patterns to help people self-recognize what's going on for them in the coaching area. And that really helps them take more ownership and shift.
Do you have to kind of tell them where you are at the time? Because, I'm talking to you now as a therapist.
Exactly.
I'm talking to you now as a coach.
Yes.
Or I'm, that kind of thing. So they know, they don't get confused, I guess. I don't know.
Right. So they're coming in under a particular contract. So they're either coming in and the contract that we have is around therapy, or they're coming in under a contract of coaching.
Gotcha.
And if I do see some overlap, I might say, okay, my therapist part wants to say something. Are you okay with that?
Yeah. So you basically announce this other part of you, and then you go back to coaching or vice versa.
Right. Right.
No, I like that. I mean, I think it could be confusing, but I think it's very useful. I think it's very useful. I mean, and certainly the discussions you and I have had about family-owned businesses, which are like really on the ultimate of problems, because you love and business together, and it's like they just don't always mix. They don't always mix.
Talk about collision of roles.
Oh man, yikes! It is.
Yeah.
Mom loved you more than me.
Right.
It's really funny. I'm watching Andrew Cuomo with his brother.
Oh,
If you've been watching the CNN, you really, it's being played out in real time with those guys. It's really funny. I mean, it's amazing.
Bringing out childhood photos.
yeah. Just the one he just gave. I thought it was.
Yeah.
Take that picture down.
Right.
Couple other questions. What do you think? What's your view of when this thing changes? I mean, it's going to be a big change. We've been home now for 3 or 4 months, and suddenly you're used to that new pattern. Are there going to be? Do you think you'll see changes psychologically in people, how they view work, how they view home, saying, "Hey, you know what? I've enjoyed not driving 3 hours a day, or I really missed it, and now I'm looking to go in." Or will we change? Will we have 3-day work weeks now? Will kids be off 2 days a week so the parents can watch them? I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
My thoughts are that this is the in time in vivo experiment, right? People have talked about, what is the balance between working from home and working in the office, and everybody has such a mixed opinion about that. Now we're actually seeing. And so I think for some businesses, they're going to see, it is okay for our people to work home a couple days a week if they want to.
Yeah.
And we can trust them, and we know that we're still, that everybody's doing what they need to do, because they did.
Mhm.
I also think there's going to be importance on that connection, that face-to-face connection, because we need that. Virtual is great, but we need that human-to-human exchange, right? That's happening in real time in the room. And I think people are really going to realize how much they value that, and want that connection. So I think it'll be a bit of both.
Yeah, I'm thinking it's going to be, we're going to learn some things we would have never learned had we not been put under this pressure.
Exactly. It's an experiment.
Do you think there'll be any fundamental changes? I mean, I just didn't, I wondered if, I don't even know if that's a good question or not.
What I am loving or finding interesting, I work obviously in Northern Virginia with a lot of how do we get our kid into the best private preschool so that then we can get into the best high school, so then we can get into an Ivy, and then blah, blah. And when I would talk to people about slowing down or being more intentional in their family interactions, it was always, yes, I know that's important, but we just can't. We just can't, because Johnny's got to go to soccer and Elizabeth has to go to gymnastics and, blah, 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 blah. And just, no, I can't. No, I can't. No, I can't. Boom. Now you're doing it.
Now you can, yeah.
And look at that. Like, nobody died. Like, the world is, and you're right, that everything is still functioning. Everything is still functioning, and you actually like have a relationship with your kids. Isn't that interesting? And your kids are learning, maybe, hopefully, that their worth is relational. It's not just on how well you do this sport, or how well you do this Odyssey of the Mind, or how well you, there's more to it than that. Those things are important. I'm not trying to downplay that, because we need to develop competence, but not at the expense of relationship. And I think too often, at least in this particular place, we lose sight of that because we're trying to keep up.
Yeah, but
and everybody just hit the brakes.
Absolutely, I think it's a great experiment, as you say, an in vivo experiment. That if the kids aren't going 15 different places a day, the world does not end. Right. In fact, maybe it gets better in a way.
Right. I learned that I actually like my kids. Oh, look at that. Ooh, they actually have something to say. That's interesting. Yeah.
Well, I remember one guy said, I remember one funny joke about going to the best schools. He said, Mommy says I'm going to Harvard. Daddy says I'm going to Yale. But the guidance counselor says I'm not going anywhere.
That's great. That's great.
Anyway, last question is, any final pieces of advice for leaders that you would say, getting through this time to the next fight. Well, what I don't know, what pieces of advice might you bring to the table?
Well, I think the biggest one is slower is faster. Slower is faster. So when we can slow down, right? When the leaders can slow down and get their house in order, right? Face their gremlins, figure out what's happening for them, and then trust that they're going to figure this out, right? Things are going to have to shift. There's no question. When they're in that position of, I'm open to coming up with new possibilities, then they can inspire their team in that same way. And so, but they've got to slow down in order to go faster. Then this is the intention about the message, right? If I'm just talking to everybody every day because I've been told that I'm supposed to talk to my team every day, and I'm talking to them every day, and I'm just making them more frantic because I'm bringing that frantic, anxious energy to them. But if I slow down, think about what I want, what in this moment am I trying to convey to them? How am I trying to inspire them? The work will go faster, because I've just inspired them to not be in their stress physiology. They feel safe, secure, they feel seen, they feel part of a team, they feel like I've got their back. Then that frees them up to be creative. And then I've got to ask them what they think, right? Well, this is new ground. What do you think? Like, what are your ideas? Let's be in it together. So slower is faster.
I like that. Go slow to go fast.
Yeah.
I like that. Angela, great talk, man. This is great stuff. I appreciate you taking the time out. I know you're busy right now with all your clients, but thanks for taking the time out for this interview. I learned a ton of stuff. And
oh, great. This was fun. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm gonna send this to my clients and say, hey, listen to her.
Fantastic.
Don't listen to me. I don't know what I'm doing.
Oh, anyway. I'll say listen to Steve too.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Day. We'll talk soon.
Sounds great.
Hang on.